Good morning. In this week's Parashat Shlach, Moshe sends the ill-fated mission of the spies to go and investigate the land of Israel. And they come back with the evil report. The nation believes them. As a result, the entire nation is denied entrance into Israel for that whole generation, another 40 years until the new generation arises. And the question is, how did this mistake come about? How did this happen? Now, I don't believe in blame finding and witch hunting and going back and trying to, work out, well, whose fault was it? But the truth is, these incidents are written in the Torah for us to learn from them. So the question really is, in a constructive way, what mistakes can we learn from over here? And there's a very interesting idea that the Midrash says in Bamidbar Rabbah 16:2. It quotes from the book of Tehillim, from the book of Psalms, chapter 76. It says, "Ishtolalu avirei leiv, namu shnatam." The mighty of heart lost their minds, and they slumbered in their sleep. And the Midrash says about that, "Ishtolalu," they lost their minds, "Ele Moshe v'Aaron sheshalchu hameraglim, uvau v'amru lashon hara al haaretz." These are Moshe and Aaron, the mighty-hearted ones, who sent the spies, and they came and reported the slander, the evil speech about the land. And Midrash continues, "Kol kach lama." So why do we criticize Aaron and Moshe? Al shahayu shluchin tipshin, because the people they sent were fools. They sent the wrong people. They should have been more discerning. And Rabbi Yisrael Me'alau, the previous chief rabbi of Israel, contrasts this with what we find in Bereshit at the beginning of Parashat Vayishlach, chapter 32, verse 4, where it says, "V'yishlach Yaakov malachim lefanav, el Esav achiv artza seir sdei Edom." And Yaakov sent malachim, we'll define that in a second, in front of him, to Esav, his brother, to the land of Seir, to the field of Edom. And the question is, what are these malachim? Malach can mean a messenger, can also mean an angel. And Rashi says over there, malachim mamash, when it says that he sent messengers, it wasn't referring to human messengers. Yaakov sent angels. So Rabbi Lau asks, why is Rashi so convinced that Yaakov sent angels? Maybe he sent messengers, maybe they were human beings. And he says, because this was a mission of peace to Esav, this was a mission of critical importance, that Yaakov would not have entrusted to simply a servant, to simply a messenger. Something of that level of importance, he should do himself. When I told this idea to somebody this week, they said to me, yes, so we see that you shouldn't trust people. And that somebody who has trouble trusting people. But I think that's the wrong angle to take on this message. Because if you look in Parashat Yitro, if you look in the book of Shmot, this is in chapter 18, verse number, from about verse number 13, where Moshe is judging the entire people. And Yitro's father-in-law comes to him and says, this is too difficult, you're going to be exhausted, the nation's going to be exhausted. And he says in verse 21, "Ve'ata techezeh mikol ha'am," and I want you to see from all the nation, anshe chayil, men of chayil, of substance, yireh Elokim, who respect Hashem, anshe emet, men of truth, sonei vatza, who hate illicit profit, v'samta alehem sar alefim sar me'ot sar chamishim v'sar asarot, and place them over the nation as officers of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. So he sets all these requirements for people that Moshe says, Moshe, it's too much, you can't do it yourself. And Moshe agrees. Moshe agrees, and they indeed set up such a system, which seems to be a good system. What are the requirements for these men? So Yitro again is not proposing just putting anyone forward for the position. He says something quite specific. He says, firstly, you should see im Ruach HaKodesh, with the Ruach HaKodesh, with divine inspiration. Don't just take them through human resources. Should use a spiritual sense to find them. And Shachal means Ashirim, wealthy people, since they won't have the temptation to be bribed. And She'emet, men of truth, Ale Bale Haftacha, people who keep their promises, that they are trustworthy and people know they can trust them. Sonei vatza, those who hate money. Rashi says, Sheson in et mamunam bedin. They hate money, they hate their own money in judgment. In other words, they'd rather give up the money than go to court. That we're asking for really serious people over here. And then it says that Moshe vishma Moshe lechol Yitro lechol chotano. Moshe listened to his father-in-law. V'yaz kol asher amar, and he did everything that he said. V'ivchar Moshe anshe chayil mikol Yisrael. And Moshe chose men of chayil, men of strength, men of wealth, from all the Jewish people, and he appointed them. And the question the Gemara asks, it says, well, what about all the other requirements? What about men who hate profit? What about men who keep their promises? What about all of these things? And the Gemara says he couldn't find such people. He couldn't find people that met up with all of those things. And so he had to appoint regular people. And so we see the compromises over here. Sometimes it's simply impossible to send somebody else. Sometimes it's impossible to do it yourself. And it's impossible to find the right person. So you've got to find the okay person. And Moshe is not criticized for that, because if there aren't such people, there aren't such people. The time that we criticize Moshe is, perhaps the criticism is that he should have gone to spy out the land himself, although I don't know what the Jewish people would have done in his absence. But certainly the criticism is that he should have chosen better people for it. If there's something that needs to be done well, you can do it yourself, or you can choose somebody who's appropriate, or perhaps a third option is Moshe should have trained the spies in some way, should have run some kind of workshop. Perhaps they weren't ready. Perhaps nobody was ready for this mission. And perhaps Moshe and Aaron should have taken it upon themselves to train these people, to ready them for the mission, to give them that kind of inner strength. In the same way that Moshe blessed Yeshua, that he gave him he changed his name from Hoshea to Yeshua, he gave him an extra blessing. In the same way that Caleb sought guidance and inspiration when he went to pray at the tomb of our forefathers in Israel when he was on the spying mission. Maybe Moshe and Aaron should not have waited for Caleb to seek out that inspiration himself, should not have singled out Yeshua for that, but should have given all the spies the strength and courage that they needed to go and do that mission. Either way, the message is clear. If you can do something yourself to high standards, wonderful. If you can't find the right people for the job, and if you can't find the right people, do your best to create the right people. Have a wonderful Shabbos.